They say that only the good die young, but in the case of King Charles II, it's more like only the hungry die young, because throughout his long life, the British monarch had one main focus: food. That's right, I'm your host, and this is our channel. And today, we'll be looking at the story of a monarch who ate his way through England and France. Even though he lived to be 67 years old, King Charles II was a little chubby boy at heart. From the time he was a baby, Charles was destined to become king. At the age of 14, he weighed over 200 pounds. But given Charles's unhealthy obsession with food, none of these women were interested in marrying a man whose waist size was rapidly approaching 5 feet. Within a year, he was back to eating everything in sight. It seemed that Charles's metabolism was just too powerful for him to resist. They were just happy to have a king back after a decade of living under Oliver Cromwell's Puritan rule. Charles II was their chance to return to the good life, and they weren't going to let him disappoint them. In 1667, while visiting France, Charles sampled some delicious pastries and immediately decided to recreate them at home. Charles hosted a series of lavish banquets that were meant to show off the wealth and power of the monarchy. These feasts were legendary, with one particularly harrowing spread featuring 15 courses of delicious food. Can you imagine? 15 courses! He continued to eat everything in sight until one fateful day in 1685, when he ate himself to death. The king was 55 years old. According to reports, he suffered a stroke and died after eating a particularly large meal. The dish that killed him was a simple one: a roast pig stuffed with forcemeat and covered in pastry. It might not sound like much, but given Charles's unhealthy eating habits, it was enough to send him to the afterlife. It's enough to make your stomach hurt just thinking about it. His son and successor, James II, was also overweight and suffered from the same health problems. In fact, James was even heavier than his father, weighing in at over 300 pounds. Thankfully for James, he did unshare Charles's unhealthy obsession with food and managed to reign for 22 years without eating himself to death. The people loved to eat as much as Charles, but they weren't exactly thrilled about having to pay for his lavish lifestyle. Do you think Charles II's death was an accident, or was he simply unlucky? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more historical tales. Thanks for watching. To make matters worse, Charles's unhealthy eating habits were taking a toll on his health. By the 1670s, he was starting to suffer from the effects of gout and his mobility was severely restricted. It got so bad that the king had to use a wheelchair to get around. The guests at these banquets were treated to everything from roasted peacock to grilled venison. And of course, no meal was complete without the king's favorite, pastries. He brought the recipe back to England and soon had the royal pastry chef experimenting with new recipes. Given Charles's unhealthy obsession with food, Charles II insisted on using only the freshest ingredients and hired the best chefs in the kingdom to prepare his meals. In fact, he was so obsessed with food that he kept a personal chef at all times, even when he was traveling. When Charles visited Scotland in 1669, he brought along not one but 2 whole kitchens to cook his meals. One kitchen prepared his food while the other one kept his larder stocked with fresh pastries. It's no surprise that he became the unhealthiest king in English history. Well, it's basically a storage space where food is kept, especially in a large household or a royal court. Now, you might be wondering how 2 kitchens and a larder full of pastries could possibly fit in a small Scottish castle. And the answer is, they didn't. Charles had to have a tent constructed outside the castle walls to house his kitchens and larder. And this wasn't just a small tent. We're talking about a structure that was big enough to accommodate several rooms. Fortunately for Charles, along came Portuguese Infanta Maria of Braganza, who didn't care that Charles looked like he needed to lose a few pounds. The two were married in 1662, and Maria proved to be a good influence on her husband. Unlike Charles, she had a healthy appetite and was very active. The couple enjoyed walking together in the gardens of their country estate, and Maria even introduced Charles to the sport of hunting. The king took to it like a fish in water and quickly became one of the best sportsmen in the kingdom. As if that wasn't bad enough, Charles also suffered from severe gout. Just 2 years after his marriage, he weighed over 280 pounds. At this rate, he wouldn't survive much longer. Realizing this, Charles went on a diet. He cut out the booze, he cut out the sweets, and he cut out the fatty foods. He even hired a personal trainer, who helped him to exercise regularly. Surprisingly, the diet worked. In just a few months, Charles had lost over 50 pounds, which is a painful form of arthritis caused by excess weight. It was so bad that during one particularly bad flare-up, doctors had to bleed him to relieve the pain. His father, King Charles I was so fond of the child that he declared the day of his birth a national holiday. Unfortunately, Charles's mother, Henrietta Maria, died shortly after giving birth to him, so the young prince had to be raised by servants. This may have contributed to his unhealthy obsession with food, since the royal family was unreally known for their nurturing skills. And just like us, his love for food often got him into trouble. Hi everyone! The story of King Charles II began in 1630 when he was born in London. Luckily for Charles, his nanny was a Frenchwoman named Louise de la Valliere, who doted on the royal infant. She stayed with the royal family until 1649. He loved to eat, and he loved to eat a lot. We're talking about an appetite that would put any man to shame. Most people are perfectly happy with 3 meals a day, but Charles required a minimum of 5 meals per day, not including snacks. And his daily intake of food was enough to feed a small army. During one particularly harrowing meal, Charles ate 14 mutton chops, 4 whole roast geese, and a whopping 6 loaves of bread. Not surprisingly, given his dietary habits, Charles suffered from stomach problems all his life. At which point she returned to France and later became the mistress of the Sun King, Louis XIV. But that's a story for another time. Back to Charles. The little prince grew up to become a chubby teenager. And even though he was quite tall for his age, standing at around 5 feet 10 inches, he couldn't get rid of his baby fat. In fact, Charles was so obsessed with food that he earned the nickname the Two-Footed Oven. As a teenager, he was already showing signs of the obesity that would eventually kill him. Despite his health issues, Charles was the most eligible bachelor in England, and suitors from all over Europe lined up to ask for his hand in marriage. But even all the exercise in the world couldn't stop Charles from gaining weight. Unfortunately, the king's resolve didn't last long. By the time he took the throne in 1660, he was already obese and in poor health. But the people of England didn't care. During his first year back in England, it wasn't just the quantity of food that impressed the English people. The quality was top-notch as well. What's a larder, you ask? Charles's obsession with food didn't just make him the most popular king in England, it also made him the most hated. But Charles didn't care about the naysayers. When Charles II died, he left behind a legacy of obesity and gout. And that's the story of how a king ate his way through England and France.